Hello, I'm Gene Tyndall with Tompkins International. We are an international supply chain consulting firm that helps companies improve their value creation by innovations and improvements to supply chains. As such, we focus on making supply chains more agile, adaptable, and flexible. One of the terms these days that we embrace and help companies with is demand-driven. And we're fortunate to have two experts here with us today, both founders and CEOs of leading companies that provide services and solutions in this demand-driven area. Jim Tompkins is founder and CEO of Tompkins International, and Greg Brady is founder and CEO of One Network Enterprises. Greg couldn't be with us physically here today, but he will respond to these questions as Jim will as we go forward. So it is a question and answer format. I'll be asking the questions of either Greg or Jim or both. And these are questions, by the way, that we've gotten from many of you as we've talked about these new services and solutions with companies around the world. All right, I'm going to start with the question of what is really new about demand-driven and operations and strategies, and how this really is different than what it used to be. Jim?
Thanks, Gene. And it's a pleasure to be here today to have a chance to chat about this subject, which is a subject that both Greg and I have been working on for well over 10 years. Now, as Gene says, though, there's the old demand-driven, and then there's the new demand-driven. And so when we talk about the old demand-driven, we go back to when Greg started his company, One Network Enterprises, which was driving the philosophy of demand-driven supply chain. At the same time Greg was doing that, I wrote a book called No Boundaries. And in the book, No Boundaries, what I talked about is an aspirational level of what we needed to work to achieve. And I talked about 6 levels of supply chain excellence. The first level of supply chain excellence I called business as usual. And business as usual is when finance and marketing and merchandising and production and distribution kind of all do their own thing. And so they're very selfishly saying, I want to be the best distribution department. I want to really be good at planning. I want to do great on inventory management, but they're not looking at the bigger picture. And so that's why it's called level 1. And it's really just talking about how businesses have gone on for a long time. Level 2 of the 6 levels is what we call link excellence. And link excellence is really the beginning of a supply chain thought process. In fact, some people call what I call link excellence supply chain management. And what we do in link excellence is that's when finance and manufacturing and distribution and operations and inventory and planning all kind of work together, and they understand the other's objectives, and so they're trying to get the best link possible to contribute to the overall supply chain benefit. But they're still really only thinking about the link. The third level of supply chain excellence is what we call visibility. And visibility is still a very selfish view, but now what I'm doing is I'm looking down the supply chain and up the supply chain. I'm looking at my supplier, my supplier's supplier, my supplier's supplier's supplier. I'm looking at my customer and my customer's customer and my customer's customer's customer. And I'm looking at the entire supply chain to gather information so that I can improve what I'm doing in my link. And so it's still selfish, it's still link-oriented, but I now have visibility as what's going on from a supply and a demand point of view. Level 4 then is when I'm really starting to make a difference from a supply chain perspective, and that's called collaboration. And collaboration is now I'm talking to my supply and my demand side, and I'm saying, what can we do to make it a better deal for the ultimate consumer? And we're all focusing on the ultimate consumer. And what is my link's role on making the ultimate consumer's purchasing experience at a whole new level? So that's level 4, collaboration. Level 5 is when we really start to hum. I call level 5 synchronization or synthesis. The synthesis word I like because it gives a feeling of flow. I think of the word synthesis, I'm thinking I got a big blue link and a yellow link and a green link of this supply chain traveling over the flame of synthesis. And this flame is very hot. And what it does, it melts the blue link and the yellow link and the green link. And what I have coming off the back side of the flame is a flow of molten metal. And it's blue and yellow and green all mixed, and it's flowing. And it's flowing to satisfy the demand of the ultimate consumer. Now we're really talking supply chain. And then what we want to do is we want to increase the velocity of the information from the customer so that we can become more demand-driven. And so this is really, really where we're talking about the old demand-driven, and that it is pull. We are pulling from the ultimate consumer through each of the links of the chain, but to tell you the truth, it's aspirational. When I wrote the book, you couldn't really do it. When Greg began his work at One Network Enterprises, you couldn't really do it. But now we move forward. And not only is there an opportunity to really do it, but now we're faced with a much more complex supply chain, so we have no choice but to really do it. If we look at today's supply chain, we find that the lead times are longer. We find that the variability of lead times are much greater. We find that there's much more suppliers in our supply chain. We find out that we have demands from multiple channels. We find out the cost of supply chain is much greater. We find the supply chain is global. And now with these 6 factors, what we begin to understand is that we need a whole new robust understanding of how the supply chain can truly be demand-driven. And so this more robust understanding requires that we kind of break it down. If we look at the slide that we have here, we see what we call is the supply chain model. And the supply chain model talks about what is the overall strategy, what is the overall organization, and then what are the metrics that we're going to be measured. What are our performance indicators? And then within the link, so this is a picture of the link, we start with, on the one side, the suppliers, and on the other side, the customers. And then what we have is the mega processes within the link. And the mega processes within the link are plan, buy, make, move, store, and sell. And that goes through the link. And from there, we get the flow of materials, the flow of information, the flow of cash, and the flow of work. So we get that flow that I'm talking about. Now, this is a picture of a link. And so then what we do to create a chain is we place link after link after link after link. So link 1 does plan, buy, make, move, store, sell. And that cell becomes the plan for the next link. Buy, make, move, store, sell, which becomes the plan for the next link, plan, buy, make, move, store, sell. And then eventually we get to the ultimate cell, which is the consumer. And the consumer is now doing the buy. Now here's where we get demand-driven at a whole new level of. And this is when we're talking about the new demand-driven. Because with the new demand-driven, we're not just pulling into that last link. When that consumer speaks, he pulls the entire chain. And so now, Gene, this is so cool because what happens is the whole chain is now in a sell one, buy one, make one, prepare to make one, and plan one. And now the whole link flows. And so the consumer buys one, and then what we're going to do is we're going to sell them that, and then we're going to buy another one, and then we're going to make another one, we're going to plan to make another one, and then we're going to actually start with the next link, and the next link. And now the flow through the supply chain in sell one, buy one, make one, buy the materials to make one, and plan one. Now, the question is, what's one? You know, is that one each, one case, one pallet, one truckload, one container? That's the flow, and we can figure that out later. The important thing is the customer is pulling the product through the supply chain. And so that's the new demand-driven operations that we're talking about. And that's what makes this really, really, really cool. Now, let me give you some characteristics of what we're talking about with respect to demand-driven operations. And so if we look at the next slide, so we see the first point of the new demand-driven is instead of focusing on assets and products, what we're doing in the new demand-driven, we're focused on customer needs and services. The second point, instead of an operations strategy that is based on throughput and asset utilization, we have an operations strategy that drives demand to supply. Third, where we go from a performance measures that target functional productivity and cost performance, we're now targeting customer service, product availability, and margins. Fourth, where we move from a supply chain scope that is primarily logistics in the old demand-driven to a new demand-driven where supply chain scope encompasses the multi-party, multi-echelon supply network. Fifth, where we evolve from visibility being limited to inventory on hand and periodic reviews of what's available by looking at the visibility across the entire chain, to near real-time availability, where we really know what's in each link of the supply chain and what's flowing in the supply chain in a real-time mode. Sixth, from a supply chain where inventory management is about storage to inventory management really being about velocity. Number seven, where we go from a periodic analytic that provide internal incremental supply chain improvement based on what the past data and the models have said, to a sense of really understanding what are the future problems and opportunities in the new demand-driven supply chain that we can resolve. We can address the problems before they occur. And then lastly, number eight, where instead of sales and operations planning, that is not a business discipline, to an environment where sales and operation plans are disciplines and effective. So what we see is the old demand-driven supply chain is about pull. Okay, so we're still thinking pull, but we didn't have the methodology and the thought process and the technology to allow us to really pull all the way from the consumer. And so now, Gina, as you well know, what we're talking about is the pull through the entire supply chain based on the real demand of what the consumer needs. This is so much easier, and it takes a very complex environment and makes it simple. You sell one, you buy one, you make one, you buy the material to make it, and then you plan it. And then it flows in the supply chain. That's demand driven. It makes all the sense in the world, and it's what we really need to be doing.
Excellent. I really like the metaphors you used because you've made a complicated subject understandable, and the flow is so important. Thanks, Jim.
You know, Gene, I love that because what we're really talking about, the consumer, I'm thinking about it's a drum beat. And so the consumer's hitting the drum. And as the consumer hits the drum, not just the last link, but the whole chain is going boom, 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 and it's responding, and you got the flow. Yeah. And it's so cool. Yeah, very good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Greg, Jim has covered a lot here for the understanding of what demand-driven is, and thanks to you. Greg, let's hear some of your views on demand-driven, the new one, and how you see it fitting in as Jim set up that picture and what it is, please.
Yeah, I guess first you'd have to contrast how the current marketplace works today, so before you can understand what demand-driven really means. In today's market, you plan within your four walls, and your planning tools and your execution systems really can't see what the actual demand is at the customer level or back at the supply side. What demand-driven means is you're focusing in on the end consumer, whether that be a store or a website, and quickly reacting to both planning what his demand is going to be and executing to the actual demand throughout the day. What demand-driven means is focus on the actual consumer.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, with Jim's good definition and yours now of what really new demand-driven operations is, let's go back to Jim because I'm interested in the impact of these new strategies and operations and thinking around the new demand-driven. How does that really impact end-to-end supply chains?
Well, the impact is revolutionary because what happens is this drumbeat allows us to only focus on what the customer really wants. And what happens is when the whole chain focuses on what the customer really wants, it simplifies the world. If you look at today, each link, and in fact, if you're at a level one of supply chain where it's business as usual, each department within the link has its own sales and operations plan. Well, when you're in a demand-driven environment, there's a sales and operations plan for the chain. And it's the drumbeat of the marketplace. The customer is pulling. And so we don't have a sales and operations plan for link one and a sales and operations plan for link two and a sales and operations plan for link three, or heaven forbid, a sales and operations plan for sales, a sales and operations plan for manufacturing, et cetera, as we've seen a lot. What we have is a sales and operations for the supply chain. And so what happens is we're focusing on the consumer and inventory melts. And so what happens is you now have this flow, and it's about movement. And so the synchronization of the demand pulling the supply allows the supply chain to just flow. And it makes so much sense. And so the impact is it's a whole new game, and it allows us to create a tremendous competitive advantage.
So, Greg, as you heard Jim state the impacts of across the chain and not within each link, and I know you believe strongly this is the way companies need to go, what's the best way to deal with those impacts and really help the decisions that need to be made across the supply chain as well as within each?
Well, Gene, that's a great question. And what's beautiful about becoming demand-driven is that your systems actually become more elegant. In today's world, you have many different planning systems, all focused on different objective functions, lots of execution systems within your organization, outsourced to your trading partners. In a demand-driven world where you can connect directly to demand and flow it all the way back to the suppliers, the system actually becomes much easier to use. You can plan both the future as well as you can execute and re-execute all day long. So the value of this solution is to drive out significant inventory, and it's actually a simpler system to implement.
Greg, you touched on many-to-many and a network-based platform. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because that seems to me that's the key to the technology support of what Jim was talking about.
So a many-to-many network, what that means is that you can do business with anybody else on the network. So if you think about why you would want to do that, you have many channels, whether it be your retailers, you have outsourced service providers around logistics, you have co-manufacturers, co-packers, you have your raw material suppliers. What a many-many network allows you to do is interconnect all those trading partners together, giving everyone a single focus on the consumer. So everybody is focused on satisfying what it takes to get that sell-through and make that consumer successful.
How does the cloud really make a difference with one's technology and what Jim was saying about transforming supply chains to demand-driven?
So operating in the cloud is necessary in a many-to-many network environment because no one single company can run a service where others are going to be on that system. So as a cloud service, it's a many-to-many system in which you subscribe to use. And there's also a lot of advantages as far as how quickly you can deploy this service and the cost of maintaining it, since everyone shares in the overall cost of that many-to-many network.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Let's go back to Jim for a moment. Jim, as you well know, companies now more and more are selling products through more than one channel. And we've talked mostly about the supply chain traditionally end-to-end and going to the customer, whether it be a retailer, a distributor, or for that matter, another producer. What new strategies are we seeing for companies that sell through more than one channel?
Well, the reality today, Gene, is, as you well know, is virtually all companies are selling in multi-channel. There are no single channel people out there anymore. The world has got too complex and there's too many options. And so as we enter the multi-channel environment, what we find is the level of complexity just grows. And if we're not doing demand-driven, we have a real challenge. Let's take, for example, a retailer. So a retailer is going to have some store selling, and you're going to have the store demand, the drumbeat coming from the store, and we're going to have to replenish that store from distribution centers. And then what we're going to have is we're going to have online customers, a drumbeat coming online, and that is going to require the fulfillment of those orders from fulfillment centers. So we have fulfillment centers for online customers, and we have distribution centers to replenish the stores. What's going to need to happen then is we're going to need the capability to take those demands and combine them. And so what happens is in the fulfillment center requirement, we have something called a distributed order management system, a DOM, a DOM. And the DOM acts as the traffic cop as to which fulfillment centers or which forward fulfillment centers should handle each online order. And then the distribution centers decide which distribution centers should fulfill each store's demand. And so now we have the online drumbeat, we have the in-store drumbeat, we have the distributed order management system managing the fulfillment exercise. And then what we need is we need the orchestration behind the distribution centers in the DOM that's going to decide where do we put which inventory. orchestration is going to say, let's put this inventory in distribution, let's put this inventory in these fulfillment centers, and that's going to allow us the greatest possibility of meeting that drumbeat. Behind the orchestration is what? It's the demand-driven supply chain that's picking up on the combination of these drumbeats and saying, how do we fulfill all the way back to the raw material provider through the different links of the chain so that we are providing the flow of inventory all the way back from the raw material all the way up to the orchestration where we split between distribution center and fulfillment center. Within the fulfillment center, we have a DOM to decide how to fill the orders, and then we fill the customer's order in online, or we fill the customer's orders in store. And so it really becomes an environment where the demand-driven has to work with these multiple channels. And so we have to customize, if you will, the network in a way that allows us to fulfill the drum beats that we're hearing. I know some companies that have 6 or 7 different drum beats, and you got to combine those and take that and tie it in with your demand-driven supply chain so that you have flow so that it all works and works in a very good environment. So Gene, what we see is it's really clear. If we look at what just happened, if we look at Black Friday, the 4 days of Black Friday. By the way, Black Friday wasn't 24 hours long this year. It was 96 hours long. And then we look at Cyber Monday, which, by the way, wasn't 24 hours long. It was 96 hours long. And so we have the 8 days of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And if you look at those 8 days and the volume of product that flowed and the responsiveness we needed in the supply chain, if we had the old supply chain, we're going to be missing orders because we're not going to have the inventory in the wrong locations and we're not going to provide the product to the consumer. Today's consumer wants the product when they want it, where they want it, how they want it, and our job in a demand-driven supply chain is to provide that. And so if we look at demand-driven supply chain, it's the only operation strategy that gives us the ability to respond in short lead times to meet those requirements. And so what we find is as you grow in complexity and multi-channel, the requirement for demand-driven is more than ever before. And so we really need to get on with demand-driven supply chain because we can't respond to these drum beats without it.
You mentioned order fulfillment. Let's drill into that just a little bit. And I'm going to start with Greg this time. And Greg, the points you made earlier about a single version of the truth and moving things faster and so on comes into play, it seems to me, to Jim's point about multi-channel and the DOM for distributed orders. Talk to us a little bit about your point of view in One Network's solutions having to do with fulfilling orders no matter where they come from and where they need to go.
So order fulfillment historically has been focused on a push environment where I plan my manufacturing, I allocate my inventory, I push it out through DRP processes, and then I respond to orders, and I hope I got all my push environment right. In a demand-driven system, order fulfillment changes. It's a pull system. The demand generates the pull orders, it generates the manufacturing production schedules, it generates the raw material pulls. It coordinates everybody around the actual consumption by the consumer.
Okay, and Jim, do you want to add anything to what Greg just said about that order fulfillment thing?
Well, I agree with Greg. The bottom line is what we're going to have is we're going to have more smaller orders flowing more frequently. And so it's going to be more about the flow of small orders as opposed to this huge batch of stuff that's sitting there. And so it's about velocity, it's about movement, and the impact is going to be huge because that changes the supply chain. We have to change transportation, we have to change our distribution centers, we have to change our fulfillment centers so that we can flow that product in those small batches. So lots more flow, lots less inventory.
Good. Let's change a little bit the topic here because we have a lot of people viewing this video cast from 3PLs or logistics service providers. We get this question frequently from them or their customers who have 3PLs engaged to move the products. Can you comment a little bit about demand-driven and how it impacts 3PLs and how they should be thinking more about it, and in fact, maybe changing their operations and practices to align with demand-driven. Jim, could you start on this?
Sure. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for 3PLs or logistics service providers, because what it does, it allows them to provide an increased service to their customers. And in fact, the LSPs can teach their customers how to become demand-driven by really being an important node in the overall supply network. And so I believe that by LSPs being demand-driven, they're going to provide their customers a better job, and therefore the LSP is going to become more sticky. And this is really key. The stickiness of the LSPs is important for both the LSP's business and the supply chain's business, because it allows the product to flow. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for LSPs to become demand-driven and for them to teach the marketplace how to have the product flow through their operations. Now, the LSPs are going to be different. They're going to have smaller, more frequent deliveries. And so they're going to have to adjust their business model as well. But I think it's an absolute awesome opportunity to give better customer service, to provide better satisfaction to the 3PL's customers, and for the 3PL to become more sticky. So it's a huge win.
Greg, your points on this too. I know one has a few 3PL customers. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so there's been a big shift in the market away from domestic manufacturing into international manufacturing, whether it's out of Asia or South Africa, it doesn't really matter. And once you distribute that manufacturing, your lead times change, the number of parties that have to be involved in getting the product to where the demand is increases. You've got problems with freight forwarders, custom clearance locations, ocean freight container processes, et cetera. So what the 4PL orchestration role, which is what it's called in the demand-driven world, will allow you to do is to plan that logistics, that fulfillment, provide visibility to all trading partners, all working together to understand where that product is and how to get it to where the demand is.
All right, I have one more question for both of you, and before we take a few that have come in from the audience. And this is about value. These days especially, companies and executives especially need to know what the return on investment will be in any initiative or any investment of expenses or capital for improvements. It would seem to me that if you get more demand-driven, some good benefits are going to come in terms of value. And as you both know, we're working hard on that to communicate it to companies. Jim, can you start with your views on value?
Well, certainly the ROI is key, and the ROI has many components. I guess I would think about 4 components that might participate there. Those would be financial measures, things about time, things about service, and things about quality. First, on financial, we're going to reduce the cost in a demand-driven supply chain because we're only going to be doing what the customer wants us to be doing. So we reduce costs, we increase margins. That's a positive financial indicator. Secondly, we're going to have a significant reduction in inventories. And so we're going to have greater capital efficiency. We're going to free up a tremendous amount of free cash flow, and that's going to have a major impact. I think if we look at it from a time point of view, we're going to become more responsive. We're going to be able to fill the customer's needs according to their drumbeat. We're going to be able to hit these peaks of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so we're going to be more responsive to that. From a service point of view, we're going to have less stockouts. The stockouts are going to be fewer, and therefore we're going to have greater customer satisfaction. And greater customer satisfaction is going to give us a higher quality customer experience, which is going to result in more revenue. So it impacts the top line and the bottom line. It's truly about profitable growth, and it's truly about adding value to the enterprise by allowing us to only do what the customer wants us to do. And so it really is a huge return on investment that's potential that we need to really move forward with. And if we don't do it before our competition, we're going to have a problem because our competition is going to eat our lunch.
Thank you. Greg, add to that, especially for what we've seen of when companies or trading partners connect to the network. What kind of value do they get back from doing that?
Yeah, we have some very large implementations, a very big implementation in the automotive space and the aftermarket parts, looking at all dealers, wholesalers, the manufacturer, all the tier 1 suppliers. In the government space, around managing pull orders and for both all products in CONUS as well as ammunition around the world. We have a large CPG company that runs from the shelf all the way back to raw material in one single integrated backbone that plans every day and re-executes every 15 minutes. The value we've seen from these large implementations has been very dramatic. We've seen significant improvement in service level and consumer sell-through at the store, as high as 99.5 plus. We've taken inventory levels in these organizations down to less than 50% of their next competitors, in both finished goods and raw materials. So the value has been translated into huge consumer sell-through and significant operational cost reductions.
Okay, thanks, Greg. We've got time for a few more and that have been submitted, and we'll go ahead with a few of these. Jim, this first one I think looks like it's better for you. It is what typically causes or triggers a company to decide to convert its operations to the new demand-driven? And are these factors either internal or external ones?
Well, I think they're both internal and external. Hopefully, if the companies are smart, they're responding on an internal basis. So hopefully internally, they're saying, we need to reduce inventories. We need to increase customer satisfaction. We need to be more responsive to our multi-channels. We need to make sure that we reduce promotions. We need to make sure we reduce markdowns. And so what do we do? How do we make this happen internally? And so it's an internally driven, demand-driven supply chain choice, and that makes all the sense in the world, and that's what it should be. Unfortunately, we're finding companies that are doing it because of external reasons. The external reasons is, oh my goodness, my competition is doing it. My competition is getting 18 inventory turns a year, and I'm getting 9. And my goodness, they're killing me. And guess what? They have a greater fill rate, and they have a greater customer satisfaction rate with half the inventory. And so what are we going to do to catch up? And so the external reasons is trying to play catch up because your competition has already gone out and done it. So if it's good news, it's because of internal reasons. We've proactively made this happen. If it's bad news, it's externally, and we're trying to play catch up.
Okay, here's another one that we have, and Jim, I'll address this to you. The question is, how long does it take the typical company to achieve demand-driven operations?
Ooh, typical company. I wish I knew who asked that question.
Right.
I could give you a better answer.
Right.
Typical company, it's a lot quicker than you think. We've been kind of saturated with this ERP thing where people are sitting around and talking about 3, 4, 5, 6-year implementation cycles. It's a no-go. In fact, if you come in my office and recommend a 5-year implementation cycle, I'm going to throw you out the window. I mean, that's a no-go. We're not going to do that, okay? To become demand-driven, it depends where you are, though. If you haven't even started the process and you're really in a old push environment, it could take as long as 12 months to get this fully implemented. But if you're already moving away from that and you're already dealing with some demand signals, maybe you're already doing visibility well and you're starting on collaboration, then we're talking maybe 6, 7 months to get there. If what you've done is you've already started to do collaboration and you've moved into the synchronization and synthesis, it's quite possible all we're doing is adding a more real-time information. And so the processes are already demand-driven, but what you're now going to do is respond to a more rapid information about that drumbeat. And in that situation, this could be done in 3 months. So I would say the quickest we've ever done it is 3 months. And then for someone who's just starting from scratch, it takes about 12 months to get done.
Okay, good. Here's one, Greg, let me ask you, 'cause Jim touched on this earlier. What if a company has already invested substantial capital in its ERP and other supply chain systems? Can't those technologies get us to demand-driven?
So that's a great question. And people have invested a lot of money in their ERP systems and their local planning applications, and if those work, you need to stay with those solutions. What demand-driven does is allows you to connect from the forwardmost supply demand source all the way back to the downstream supply sources in real time. In a traditional planning and execution system, it can't see demand, it can't see supply, it tries to guess on that. What we can provide in this type of service is we can leverage the existing systems in place, but connect all the way back into the retailer's store systems, taking out 3 to 5 days of lead time, and thus taking out significant inventory while improving service levels. Same is true on the websites, whether it's an e-commerce type solution or non-stop solution. So we provide a capability of actually embracing the existing systems you have, taking out those non-essential lead times, improving, reducing variability by improving forecast accuracy, and providing that information downstream real time to all your trading partners. So I would just suggest embrace what works and surround that with a mini platform that provides additional value.
Okay, thanks. We have time for one more, and Greg, I'm going to ask you this too, and if Jim has a thought also. How does a company know if it's truly demand-driven or not? Is it because its sales forecasts drive its buying or production? Is it because they believe their inventory is at the optimum levels? Or is it because customers are not satisfied? Greg, your views on that, please.
Great question. So to claim you're demand driven means that you must be focused on the consumer demand. So if you take CPG retail business as an example, today they measure themselves based on service levels at a DC. Well, when was the last time you went to buy grocery at a retailer's DC? Of course you don't. So the first thing that shows that you're demand driven is, are you measuring consumer sell-through? That means, can I measure the store every day and how I'm doing on meeting the consumer's demand, or a website every day? So the first is, are you focused on the consumer? The second is, there's a few rules on how a demand-driven system must work. First is, you only have one sales forecast. If the retailer is generating a sales forecast different than what you're doing, then by definition you're not working on the same plan together. So to be demand-driven, you must all focus on a single plan, what's the sales forecast, and then generate the order forecast downstream. So those are kind of the rules on what does it mean to claim you're demand-driven.
We're out of time. I really want to thank Jim and Greg. Superb answers to some complicated questions in the time we had. And I wanted to say, if anybody has any more interest in learning more about demand-driven and how you can get there, please let Tompkins know, or One Network. We work together on this, and hope you enjoyed the video cast, and we'll see you next time.